Finally I knew I had to leave. I used my money to rent a smaller house in the same suburb so that Connor could stay at the same school and Amber at the same creche. I got some furniture, nothing new, but it was my own and it would be a new start for me and the kids. I left the kids with a friend and went back home to get some of our stuff at a time when I knew Johnny would be at work. But Johnny was there, and when he worked out what was going on, he went absolutely crazy. He started screaming, calling me a slut, hitting me with a bat. I dropped all my things and jumped into the car with Johnny following right behind me. The window was down and I tried to start the car, but he leant in and grabbed the keys out of the ignition. So I took off the handbrake and started letting the car roll down the drive with my hand on the horn, beeping it as loud as I could, hoping that a neighbour would come out because of the noise to see what was going on and help me. I could hear my heart beating and I could feel that my breath was really short, but I kept hitting that horn and praying for some help. Yeah, well, they heard all the noise and they even came out to see what the fuss was about and watched as I wound up the window, hoping that perhaps the car would get me far enough away from him, even without the engine going. But it didn't, and while I sat in the car praying for help, Johnny started smashing the windows one by one with the bat until only the windscreen was left. I remember he looked me in the eye and then he smashed it and tried to grab me by the neck. And the neighbours all just stood out on the pavement staring, no one speaking, no one helping. It was like they formed a guard of honour down the street, all just staring as I finally gave him the car and watched him drive away. When my hands stopped shaking, I got myself together and called a cab, then went and got the kids, but Johnny had got there first and was demanding that my mate hand them over to him. She'd called the cops, and by the time they arrived, Johnny was holding Amber in his arms, and the cops believed him over me that the kids lived with him. That night without the kids was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep or eat. I was so worried that he'd hurt them or that I'd never see them again. Once the cops get involved in situations like this, human services have to get involved, especially where there's kids. They told me I'd have to leave, and now just go with the clothes on my back and nothing else. They had a safe place I could stay in, a refuge over in Geelong, but I had to go there now and I couldn't tell anyone where I was going. That broke my heart. I'd worked so hard at getting my own place and setting it up all nice, and I know it wasn't much, but it was going to be our new start, with no violence, and now I had to let that dream go. It's probably best that I did go. I heard later from a neighbour that Johnny had really lost it. He'd found out where the new house was and he'd broken in. He'd been camping out in the lounge room at night with all the lights out, hoping he could catch me coming home to get my stuff. God knows what he would have done to us if he'd found us. But I hated it at the refuge. Don't get me wrong, the workers were great, they did their job, helped me get Connor into a new school, got him some uniforms, but there was no one there to give me a kiss or a cuddle. No one who'd just put their arm around me and just let me talk about what had happened, or just let me be sad with them for a while. We stayed there for 2 months, but finally I rang Mum and begged to come home. She lived in the Dandenong, so once again we took what little we owned and left Geelong, drove back through Croydon at the foot of the hills, past our old home, and moved in with Mum and my sister. It was squeezy, and I don't think it's ever easy going back to live at home with your parents as an adult. We all develop our own way of doing things, but we pulled together. I just knew I had to keep it together for the kids' sake. I got Connor settled in a new school, got him his 3rd uniform in as many months. I didn't let Mum do everything for us. I did everything for the kids myself, and we paid Mum some board. I remember at night, after I'd got the kids off to bed, all I wanted was to be on my own. I used to go out to the car and have a smoke. I'm not proud to say it, but I used to just sit out there and smoke and drink beer. But I never touched a drop until after the kids were asleep, so they never knew. I know Mum didn't approve and it made us fight, but I did that every night. It was the only way I could get myself calmed down and off to sleep. I suppose you're wondering why I just didn't try and get somewhere for us to rent, where we could start our lives away from Johnny and all the violence, while not living in a refuge or with my mum. Well, you see, when you're at the refuge, you're not allowed to call anyone, to let anyone know where you are, and thinking back on it, I really couldn't cope with thinking about how I could get my life back on track at that time anyway. You just do what you have to do to get through each day. And that's the problem. I didn't think to let anyone know about the house in Croydon, and by the time I left the refuge it had been sitting there for nearly 3 months with no one paying the rent. I owed the real estate agent over $1,000, $1,000 I didn't have. Even though I explained what had happened, they held me to the lease and made me pay back everything I owed and rent on the property until they could find someone else to rent it. Said that if I didn't, they'd let other agencies know and I'd never be able to rent there again. It took me over a year to clear that debt, and what with having to pay to have all my furniture stored, that which was left, it's amazing how much of it had gone missing by the time I could pay some removalists to go around and pack it all up, and with paying board to Mum, I couldn't even scrape together a bond, let alone a month's rent. But I have my own place now, back in Croydon, but up the nice end. Connor got to go back to his old school, and I'm happy to be friends with the other parents. The house we're in isn't ideal, but it's all we could find. It took us over a year to get our finances back in order, and then it took me another 3 months to convince a real estate agent to take a chance on me and the kids. But we love it here. At night I can sit in the lounge room and cuddle my kids. If I want to, I can even have a beer in my own lounge room. But funnily enough, now that I feel safe again, I don't need that sleepy drink anymore.